Hey, you guys. I am so excited. We have a special guest, my friend Ashley Winning, here with us. Then we are going to be talking about instinctive birthing, what that looks like, and maybe just a couple of things about how to tap into that, where to begin. And first thing I want to say before I let Ashley introduce herself and kind of set the stage for how she got to where she is now, I wanted to say I actually have invested in her home birth group mentoring course. And through all of the modules and things that I'm going through, I just realized how vital instinctual and instinctive birthing, like the concept is for basically, I feel like it should be the president for everybody. That doesn't mean everybody births in the hospital or birth center or a home birth or free birth. That means everyone feels they are following their intuition, their instincts, and no one else is able to interfere with that. And that means so much to me coming from medical and birth trauma and all the things which I know Ashley relates to. So, Ashley, if you will, just kind of you can kind of go through your births, like just to give people the background. Of course, I would love to do a full birth story. We will totally do that one day. Um, and just kind of oh, the other thing I wanted to mention is that you label yourself as a highly sensitive person, and one of the things that I really related to that I never saw, not only are you plus size like me, like I use the term like people pleaser, which I think is the same thing, like highly sensitive
Yeah.
person, you're looking out for other people. And so
hmm
that perspective too, I think my listeners probably relate to. And I think to tap into your instincts, it takes overcoming so much of that. That is like such a battle, especially when you're pregnant and you feel like you have to do what other people tell you to do. So I
hmm
wanted to present with that as well before we go in. But yeah, go ahead, introduce yourself, say anything you want to say, and yeah.
Thanks, Lizzie. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. I am so honored to be here and be one of your first guests. I adore you, and it's so nice to be able to be here chatting about something that is really important to me and something that I want to share the message about, which is instinctive physiological birth. I think that people pleasing, like I work with a lot of women who are people pleasers, highly sensitive people, whatever label you want to feel. It could even go into the ADHD range, where it's all very kind of similar, but we're people pleasers. And so, like you said, when we go into birth, we're very vulnerable, we're very suggestible. And so, our people pleasers, the people who are more likely to allow other people to make choices for them or to do things for other people rather than themselves in the first instance, that can be very, you're giving away your power. That can be very challenging for us because we want to say no, but we don't want to come across as a mean girl or unreasonable. I like the term. I was always trying to be reasonable, like if they see me as logical, because having emotions is in our society is not something that is seen as a good thing. Years and years ago, women were put into nut homes. They used to use the term nut home, but psychiatric wards. I don't know that they were so much psychiatric wards back in those days. They were more like torture pits back in those days, where they would lock women up because they were emotional or they were hysterical. And so we've got this long history of women just being sent off to these torture pits essentially because they're hysterical, they're emotional, as if we're not allowed to feel, as if we're not allowed to show the world how we're feeling. And so I think we've been taught from a young age that, I personally was, that you can't show your emotions. The generation before us were a generation of people who would sweep everything under the carpet. I know my parents are like that. There would be atrocious behaviors, really bad things said, and you'll see them next time. It'll be like nothing even happened. There would be no addressing of those issues, and the trauma just continues building on that. And then they have to self-medicate those people because they don't know how to deal with their emotions. They don't know how to talk about them because they were taught from an early age that they weren't allowed to talk about their emotions. That's weak, that you can't show anyone that you're emotional crying. So people were having to turn to these other things to help cope, like whether it's food, alcohol, drugs, whatever it is, and there still is, domestic violence, taking anger out in unhealthy ways. So, that's a that's a bit off the skew there. I wasn't expecting to go down that path, but that's essentially why I'm so passionate about working with women, because women deserve a voice. Women deserve to be respected. Like we're the ones that are giving birth to the next generation of human, and we're raising the next generation of human. In my opinion, we're like goddesses. We are goddesses, you know, we deserve to be worshipped, supported, loved. We don't deserve to be abused, mistreated, put down. And then to see it happen in the hospital system, as it does happen quite often, and that to me is a human rights issue. There's a lot of legislation across the world that says that you shouldn't be doing X, Y, Z, and it depends in the state that you are and the country that you are. But there's no human rights. I mean, there are a couple of human rights lawyers here in Australia that are spreading the word about it. We call it obstetric violence. And that's kind of catching phrase here in Australia. We've just had a big birth trauma inquiry here in New South Wales, in one of the states here in Australia. And I've seen that it's caught on worldwide. People are publishing it in, I think it was in one of the renowned American newspapers or something. I think it was CNN actually. So, you know, one of the bigger names sort of thing. So it's really exciting to see that. And also I'm a very hopeful person. So I'm hoping for some more changes in the future. But my story does begin with me handing over my power in a hospital setting, trusting that the doctors, you know, are going to support me, help me to have the birth that I want. I ended up going, I basically was like, I'm going to be easygoing. I'm not going to do a birth plan because, you know, and the doctor was agreeing. That's, of course, you don't need a birth plan. We'll just go with it. And we had no discussions about birth or my preferences or anything like that. Every time I asked, it was always, we'll talk about that next time. We'll talk about that closer to date. And then I ended up getting the diagnoses of GD, induction, failed induction, didn't even go into labor, and then cesarean. And then I advocated and fought in my second pregnancy for a VBAC, but they couldn't see past my size, or they couldn't see past what they would categorize as risk in that hospital. And at 37 weeks, after advocating and being fear-mongered, and honestly, like leaving conversations with those doctors feeling like fat women can't birth, that's what they would give me so many excuses as to why it would be so much harder for me to vaginally birth. I left feeling, I mean, I was always anxious. I was crying on the way to hospital. I was so anxious. It wouldn't have been doing anything good for me and my baby. It's not healthcare, let's just say that. I would say it's definitely toxic behavior to put someone through that kind of stress and hold them emotionally hostage in that way, because what other alternative was I being offered at that point in time? What other alternatives are there for women to get the healthcare that we're taught this is what women do? And then many women will get targeted if they don't do those things. You know, I've heard of stories where CPS are called because then they're flagged as high risk because they're seen as unreasonable because they're not doing the things that the system wants us to do. So we're kind of stuck in this loop of obstetric violence, of no respect, like not respecting, you know, we talk about informed choice, but there are no informed choices really. I don't see informed consent. I tried to do the whole informed consent with my baby, with my second child, and that led to me getting kicked out of hospital at 37 weeks. So I thought I would go in, have a conversation, show that I know my stuff, understand, educated, knowledgeable. They would respect my choices, and then they would support me to birth. That's what I thought. That's what I think is reasonable in any sort of, and that's what informed consent's supposed to be. You have a conversation, make sure that you know what you're talking about, what the risks are, and then you move on. But what was happening was it was just a regurgitation of information every time, going over like I was stupid, that I wasn't understanding conversations, just constantly talking about dead baby, talking about how hard it would be, talking about how impossible it would be almost, and just really trying to fearmonger and manipulate me down that pathway. I ended up in another hospital and having spontaneous labor, you know, manual waters broken, posterior baby. They were forcing me down the C-section route. I eventually said yes, and then I ended up having a tear in surgery. So when they pulled the baby out, they allegedly say that she tore down to my cervix. I don't know whether her arm flung out, if it was something that they did. It is a risk of surgery. It is one of the risks that they were telling me when I was birthing as to why they want to get me into surgery so quickly, because they knew that my baby was going down and they didn't believe that I could vaginally birth, or they didn't trust in me, or they didn't trust in birth. They don't understand physiological or instinctive or posterior birth, I've realized as well. And so that was a very traumatic experience for me. I ended up losing 3.1 liters of blood and being on that surgery table for a number of, 3 or 4 hours, being separated from my husband and baby for four plus hours. And I came out of that with post-traumatic stress disorder for a while. I was just having flashbacks and I was just crying every single day. I was just in a state of adrenaline, anxiety. It was just horrible experience, and I wasn't going to have another birth after that. I said, that's it. 2 babies, that's it. We wanted to have 4, and I said, I can't. They told me never to labor on that again, and to essentially, I could have 2 more cesarean sections though. And so from that point, I was just like, why did this happen? Why did this happen? Why? And asking why sometimes in life can be really unhelpful. Previously, I would look at my childhood trauma and ask why, and you're never really going to get answers from that situation. But in like a birthing situation, I found it very helpful because it led me to discover what had actually happened, how the system works. It helped me to understand how my body works, how physiological and instinctive birth works. And I came across this amazing woman. I started training as a doula, and I went to a doula conference, and I came across this amazing woman, Dr. Rachel Reed, and she did a presentation, and she was talking about physiological and instinctive birth and the birthing system. She was a home birth midwife who was a researcher, who was working at a university teaching. She was also a policy maker, so she was included in some of the policies and guidelines. And so she really understood things. She's an intelligent woman. And so I thought, wow, this is an amazing person. Like, where have you been? And I just sat there like so starry-eyed listening to her. And the message that I took away is, if you want to have a physiological birth, then your best way to do that is to achieve that is by not going into the hospital, because the hospital is an intervention to begin with. And I was like, at this point, I was already decided I was free birthing, because I couldn't find a midwife and I wasn't pregnant. I was just pre-planning. And just came away with, okay, so this woman who's amazing, who's educated, who understands everything, she's basically saying, stay the hell out of the system if you want to have a physiological birth the way that we're designed and created to birth. And I was like, tick, tick, tick. It was like the best thing of my life. And I just absorbed as much information from her as possible. And then, just up-leveled everything I was learning. But it really did put me on that trajectory of learning about physiological and instinctive birth, the hormones, understanding it all. And that was my mission before my birth, to really surrender to that process.
I love, well, there's obviously those really hard parts of the stories, but what I find crazy, because in my second pregnancy, I did get my VBAC, but I was the same as you. I was like, if I just go into this, like, showing that I'm educated, it was this degree of, how hard I was trying to prove myself and show I was a good girl and like a good student. And I would read all the books and tell them everything. And it wasn't just to show I was a good girl, but I wanted to be like, I know my stuff. And at the end of the day,
Yeah.
uh, it takes it takes so much more than that, and obviously just having people support you, that and I know I just went through that module that you posted recently about finding the right support for you, and you have to feel really intuitively aligned with that. And I think it just takes, for some of us, I know there's some women out there, I feel like the Free Birth Society, a lot of the people in there, not everybody, but I feel like some of those women just come in first time moms. I'm like, oh my gosh, like y'all are like 100 steps ahead, because it takes some of us
Mm.
3 4 times to like finally feel like you can have a voice and do anything about it. And so going into what you said, because I do completely agree with you. Like, if women out there don't know that are listening, if this is your first time, um, to have a what we call a physiological birth, which is allowing the natural process of labor and birth and all the things to flow, the best bet is at home. Um, and Ashley can definitely talk about that more. But as far as like intuitive and tapping into like this instincts that we have, especially as again highly sensitive people, that having that persona, you don't really even know who you are. Like I don't know about
Mm,
you, I feel like I don't know if achieving your VBAC, I don't know if for you felt like you found yourself in a new way, because that's even though mine was like had its issues, I did feel like I finally think I know myself for the first time ever. Because there were things I did advocate for, even if it didn't pan out exactly how I wanted. It was the first time I used my voice. And so slowly, and since I had my second, I feel like, I mean, my intuition can still be blurry. You know, there's always like fears that can pop up, but I feel like I'm able to tap into that to a different level. Um, and so I guess I'm curious how obviously you knew you were going to free birth because you couldn't find the right support. So how was that journey of like going from submitting to the system? I mean, really is how it is for us. And then
mm.
taking radical responsibility and trusting your body and trusting your gut, because as I said in the beginning, yeah, physiological birth is obviously keeping it as natural and calm and all the things as possible. But, you know, I see instinctive birthing as if you feel something in your gut, then that's when you intervene and that's when you do something, which I think would be more rare if we looked at birth differently. So how did you combat trying to like find, okay, what's actually fear and what is like my gut intuition, you know, my higher power telling me, and like how'd you get there?
Okay, so first of all, before we go into this, I want to just kind of talk a little bit about physiological birth in hospital, because something that I learned from Rachel, and we all talk about this birth plan, like a lot of people who are planning a hospital birth, a lot of women. I had a birth plan, but I didn't really understand it. I didn't really understand. I just knew that this would increase my risk for C-section or whatever, and I didn't really understand it. So physiological birth isn't always the best way in a hospital environment, because you're probably, so if I was having a physiological birth in a hospital environment, right, I would not want any disruption, because you're not being disrupted. The whole point is you've got to allow your hormones to flow through. So in a hospital environment, there's going to be a lot of coaching. There's going to be a lot of like asking, can I put this in? Or we're going to do this now. So the minute that they disrupt your birth in a way, maybe not so much by talking to you, but more so if they start breaking your waters, if they start putting anything in you like a pitocin drip or anything, you're no longer having a physiological birth, because the hormones that they've created are essentially mimics of our natural hormones. And at that point, any idea of a physiological birth, of having a physiological placenta born at the end, of you can't have non-coach pushing probably if you've got the epidural. All of these things, if you're going to go down the medical route and you end up having some of these interventions, you're best to continue down that medical route, because one intervention requires another intervention. Your water's breaking. If you have that done and you get on pitocin, or if you have an epidural, you need to have pitocin, because the epidural usually slows down your labor and can stop the contractions or slow it down. So then they need to use fake oxytocin, synthetic oxytocin, to then ramp up your. So once you're in that medical model and you're doing those things, you're best to just let the professionals do what they're doing. Like that's their thing, that's their jam. They know what they're doing, they understand all the drugs. When we're talking about physiological birth, we're talking about your body has got this cocktail of hormones, and so you're keeping yourself undisturbed, and you're trusting in the process that for majority, 95% of women, birth is going to be safe for babies And for women, there's going to be a small percentage of up to maybe 5% of women and babies that birth is going to be, risky or potentially going to need intervention or support. And so we're not against having support in the hospital or from hospital or medical staff in a home birth situation with a medical midwife or calling an ambulance, because those are really important things to have and consider when we do need those things. And so when I went into thinking about physiological birth, I started to investigate, like, how often would something like this happen in a physiological birth. Most of the statistics are based on a hospital birth scenario, so they're from a medicalized birth most of the time. So you can probably reduce those a little bit in your mind, but even looking at them from that point of view, you can go, oh, this is the chance of this, and this is the chance of this happening. Some of the things I was worried about was postpartum hemorrhage or maybe baby being breech. I was worried about dyssocia, and just some of those things. So I really educated myself. I understood what to do in the situation. I knew that I was 7 minutes from the hospital. I knew I could get an ambulance here within X amount of time. I expected it would be very rare for something to happen where I couldn't get to the hospital and get the support that I needed. So on a logical level, I knew, because I'm a logical processor too. So if you're listening to this and you're a people pleaser and you are highly sensitive people generally are more intuitive. But what happens is, as you said earlier, Lizzie, is that we're so used to being told this is what we're to do, and this is, listening to other people all the time, that we do override our thinking, our intuition with thinking. And I do this myself all the time. And so I'm trying to be more intuitive. And I also did a personality test recently, and I found that I'm more logical. I'm more of a logical thinker, whereas my husband, he's an intuitive person. So throughout our journey, I would say, well, how do you know it's going to be okay? And he would say, well, I just get a feeling. And it didn't make sense to me then. I thought, oh, he's a bit of a flake, you know what I mean? Like, I'm the one here, I've got it all on my shoulders, but he thinks everything's going to be okay. Well, that's great. And now when I've done our personality, I didn't even need to do a personality test for him. I could just I just knew exactly what he was looking at, all the things. And he's definitely intuitive. So he will go with his gut. He'll just kind of sit there for a bit and go, yeah, I think it's going to be all right, and I'll be like, okay, cool. And it always is all right. So obviously it works for him. For me, I'm looking at the intellectual side of things. I'm processing things. I want the statistics. I want to understand how things work. I want to read the textbooks. I want to, understand all that. But then the next part is I do have to come home to myself and be intuitive in this birthing process. So there's only so much you can learn. And before you go, what if that does happen, right? I've got to trust in myself enough to know that I can handle this, and I know what I'm doing. I know that I can get help, and that I'm going to be listening to my body for signs. And so it's really important to start cultivating that before pregnancy, potentially, but especially during pregnancy, to really cultivate that trust, that surrendering, and listening to whether something is intuition or whether it's a fear. Now, when it comes to fear, a fear is usually panicked. It's usually a physiological response you might get as you get tense. You might start sweating. You might get sweaty palms. You might feel like you have to run and get something done straight away. You might be thinking about it over and over again. You go through that cycle loop where you're constantly thinking about it over again. Well, what if this happens? What if I have a uterine rupture? What if this happens? And you're just constantly thinking about that. Versus an intuitive thought is very calm. It's like you can't explain the reason why it's your body's telling you, but you just know it to be true, or you just know it's right. And so they come so quickly, but if you don't listen to it and then your mind goes, yeah, well, anyways, blah, 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 you overthink it and that's it. It's taken away straight away. Whereas if you go, yeah, okay, I'm going to trust that, and you let it go and you follow that and you go, oh, it was right. It was right. I'm going to listen to that. So that's the difference for me between fear and intuition. And obviously there's a lot more to it, and there's a lot of exercises you can do. There's a lot of I think it's really good to have an accountability partner or a mentor or someone to go through this with, because it's an easy concept on a basic level, but what I find is that without someone reminding you, it's really easy to just go back into that thinking mode and override everything again, and then get caught in your old patterns of spiral looping, thinking, worrying, anxiety, fear. Especially, all it takes is like one negative birth story or one thing that you see, or a family member saying something, and you're going back into that kind of habit again without being able to pull yourself back.
Absolutely. I was just saying, I don't know to who recently about like if you what what's the definition of insanity? Like doing the same things over and over again, expecting different results.
Yeah.
And it, I mean, to a degree, I mean it's very true. And it's kind of like I think a lot of people don't journal. I know like you have a whole section of this that you talk about in the course, but not everyone journals. And so then when you're like in your own head, you're stuck to yourself versus you have somebody you could get it out to. And like you said, that reminder. I think it's so important. Oh my gosh. I think people undermine having like-minded community and like people for instance, if you want an unmedicated birth or an undisturbed birth, do not talk to only people who have had epidurals in the hospital. Do not that, and it's not that nothing wrong with them, but they're not going to be the people that are going to like point you in the right direction. But I'm like you. I think, and probably it probably just stems from people that are have been like us as far as I felt when I wanted to do all the research too, postpartum planning for my VBAC. Intuitively, I will say, like, I always knew I could birth my baby. I just felt like now I got to come up against, I don't like to label them as the enemy. I'm just saying it from my point of view. That's how it felt at the time. Like, I have this medical system enemy that I have to be prepared, or whatever is the mindset I went into to defend myself, because if I'm put in a situation where, let's say, transfer to the hospital, they want to give me toast, and I'm like, okay, well, how, like, I need to know, and so I think it takes, we were just talking about like, the accountability, having like people to talk to and things to work through. And I mean, I think therapy itself is great. And all of that. I personally, and I'm glad you were doing the work before you got pregnant because I feel like I personally get thrown into it. Like, it's like,
Mm,
I I don't know. I think it is, I wouldn't say easier when you're pregnant. I think it's just more of like, okay, it's like now or never. It's like it's almost like it
mm.
flips your mind, like, okay, this is real. But I guess how did you, I mean, you obviously you looked at literature, like you did research, you studied like if this would happen, if this would happen, obviously you were close to a hospital, all the different things. um
Mm,
so your husband being like this instinctual person, like that was in tune with himself, how was he
yeah.
just like, I think everything's going to be okay too? Was he just really chill about it?
Yeah, my husband's a really calm personality. And we talked a little bit about before when you were saying some of the first time mums who go into free birth for the first time, for example. I've thought about this a lot, like why couldn't, especially when I was feeling very traumatized from my birth, why couldn't that be me? Why didn't I make that choice? Why wasn't that an option? And I've come to realize that we all come from different spaces in our life. And I think that I would have been, and I think many of us would have been intuitive naturally. It's just that we have grown up in either dysfunctional or chaotic or, potentially dangerous environments where those things get turned off, or we're raised in a schooling system where we're told we have to put a hand up and ask, "May I please, miss, can I go for a wee?" "No, Johnny, sit down. You don't need to go to the toilet." Like, you know what I mean? Like, we've come from this authoritative society, and I try to move away from that as much as possible now that I've had my experience. Like, I homeschool my kids. I teach my children that, we respect each other, but they have a voice in our family but then I explain to them the difference between mum being a friend and mum being mum, because mum has more wisdom and experiences. And so there's a balancing act there of they're allowed to have their autonomous body choices, but at the same time, mum still knows sometimes when it's a little bit better. So I see that I'm able to give that to my children. And I think that in many ways I was kind of raised like that. But at the same time, I think that my dad especially was not he wasn't, I don't know what you would say, like new worldly. He calls himself a modern snag as a joke because he's the complete opposite. It's like this new age modern guy, you know, in touch with his feelings. He's it's a bit of a joke say he's complete opposite of that. Definitely not in touch with his feelings. That's the whole joke. But you know, he's all about being tough and rough and all this sort of stuff. And so he would teach me like very masculine things, but then I had to kind of interpret how I could, but then at the same time he was telling me that it was not okay to be a woman, and women are weak and women are this and women are that and women are good in the kitchen. And so then I had to kind of take his masculine views and realize that actually he didn't mean that for me. He meant that if I was his son. And so there was a lot of situations where if I was a son, it would be totally okay, right? Because I'm a woman, I'm not respected and I'm not heard. And there's been a lot of challenges. My husband, he comes from an interesting family background, but his parents have nurtured him and loved him, and they never say anything nasty to him. He comes from a family that lift him up. He could do no wrong in his family. Him and his brother are great, like, you know, no problems. He's easygoing. And so those other people that I see, I hope that my children, my daughters, that by me giving them the insights and the wisdom that I've learned through my life, I hope that they can go into their lives making different choices. But we can only be as good as where we came from and our experiences, and being bogged down by other people's chaos and things means that we don't get a head start on life in many ways. We're kind of held back. And so for me, that's where that people pleasing tendency came from. And I think I probably would be slightly different, but perhaps not. I see my daughter, she's a highly sensitive person, and she, I would say, is even more people pleasing than me. So I do think that sometimes it's just genetic and it's a nature thing. And then I think there's a component that's nurture too. But having my daughter as a highly sensitive person has also been quite healing for me, because it's forced me to have to look at her and see the beauty of her and love her the way she is, and then have that love for myself as well, and also see how maybe the world sees me. And we make jokes like, she's like, I know, mom, it's because I'm like so highly sensitive, you know, everything just, you know, gets me. And I'm like, it's okay, because I understand you, because we're similar, and we're like, you're like my little pea in the pod. And my other daughter is an inward processor, and so she just goes completely inwards. So I'm like, tell me everything, what's on your mind? My oldest tells me everything. I'm like, okay, fine, we can work with it, because I'm open to working with it. I'm not going to shut her down and tell her feelings aren't valid or that they're wrong. Most of the time we're going to talk about it, and if I can't handle it at that time and we have a bit of a thing, we talk about it afterwards. And so that's fine. And it just goes to show how beautiful and different everybody is, but we all start in a different start to life. So I find that a lot of the ones that are choosing home birth as the first instance, they've come from a line of home birthers, or they're religious, like Christian, and that's very normal for, you know, Christian women to be having home births, or they're making different choices to mainstream. And so I just wanted to put that out there for anyone who's feeling like, I wish that I'd made a different choice. I also, as part of my method in my experience, is that I choose to forgive myself for past choices or things that I didn't know at the time, because a lot of my trauma did stem from me blaming myself for allowing XYZ to happen. And I said to myself after, when I was going in my free birth, no matter what happens, no matter if in the really rare instance that I lose my baby, which I really hope that I can be big enough, I can handle it if that happens, right? Because my parents lost a baby at 38 weeks, and I saw how they handled it. And my biggest fear was like that I would handle it the same way, and I would eventually crumble, and I wouldn't be able to be the person I'd want to be for my children or for myself. And a loss that great would be absolutely devastating. But I had to trust and believe in myself. And I had to have conversations with my husband that we would get through that. I mean, obviously, we don't know, but you can only try your very best to make that commitment to yourself. And no matter what happens, I'm going to give myself love and grace, because I sit back now and I think, what was I thinking when I bought this house, right? Why didn't I buy two houses? Why didn't I buy two? Because like the property's gone up here in Australia. I think it's gone up, around the world. I don't know. And I'm thinking, why don't we just push ourselves to our limit, buy two when we had two full-time jobs, because I didn't know what was going to happen in the future. I said to my dad, like, why didn't you tell me? Like, he didn't know. Nobody knew. Nobody knows. And there's a lot of things I look back from 10 years ago and think, oh, why didn't I do that? And it's because I didn't know. I had no experience in the game. And that's life. We don't know what's going to happen. We only know what we know now. We can only do the best we can to learn what we can, and also intuitively listen to ourselves and love ourselves. I think the biggest thing for me has been like loving myself through the journey as much as possible, because my thoughts can be quite cruel to myself. And if I allow that to happen, then that really destroys my day. And I'd rather have a happy day and be positive and enjoy life rather than sit there and feel sad for myself. And there are periods of time where there are grieving. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to have feelings of rage and anger and feeling like you were ripped off or something was stolen. I felt after my free birth, my vaginal birth, that I was whole. When you asked me, Lizzie, how did I feel? I felt like a part of me came back to myself, a part of something that was missing came back to me. I felt that I was whole again. And I didn't have that cut across my stomach that it was hard to get out of bed and sit up. It was just, I felt whole. Yeah.
Well, I'm literally crying. Um, I think so. There's probably more second time, third time moms listening because of just exactly our stories, how we connected. The audience probably resembles that. And just like I said, even despite like what I went through with my last pregnancy, that there are things that were traumatizing and bothered me. Having that experience, going through that, I think people, just society, like me and you know this, but like they totally underestimate what, even just having somewhat of a consensual autonomous birth. I mean, somewhat of it, right? Alone
Mm.
is powerful. But to like have the next level where you're like, I worked hard for this, like I came against all odds. Of course, we know like if we're just left alone, of course, yeah, 95% of women would be fine. But for those of us who have chose, subsequently to birth within the system, you feel like you just overcame a battle and like you go within the deepest parts of yourself. And just so when you're just talking about you feel whole, I'm just like, I relate to that so much because, maybe in postpartum you feel pieces come and go a little bit here and there, but like it lights up a portion of you that, uh, I don't know. I feel like the tapping into instinctive birthing and tapping, I mean, we put this label of instinctive birthing, but it's really this whole process of like finding yourself. And I think through motherhood, we kind of just, some of us just get forced into it. Like I don't think I would even have, I don't know if I would have been able to tap into this without having my kids. Do some people? Sure. But like me, I don't know. I think this was the path I was supposed to go on to, like you said, even when it comes to your daughter, like you have a chance to, not like a do-over, but it's like you get to reparent yourself and you get to reheal yourself through these journeys of birth, of instinctive parenting. I mean, shoot, that's how I see, because I'm like you, I plan to homeschool and like do all these different things. And so I think once women, and we know collectively women are not having instinctive births. I mean, that you just can't, like, I mean, it's really really hard in this when we know 1 in 3 are having cesareans, and I don't think many of them that's by choice. Women don't want to have all these interventions and things, right? And so um I've seen this quote that says like peace on earth begins at birth. And I don't think it's always the answer for everybody, but I think the people me and you talk to, I think putting yourself in this mindset of, I'm going to find my voice and find what makes the most sense for me, actually, not the most sense to like fit in or be approved of or whatever. It is a really big journey. And a lot of people, I don't think people see the value in it until, I don't know, I feel like you have no other choice sometimes. Um, so I just really connected with what you just said. Going into like, I know you had like quite a postpartum, like in the beginning right there. And like even that, what kind of feelings came up that you felt like helped guide you, like say like in that postpartum period when you transferred to the hospital? How do you feel like you navigated that and felt empowered making those decisions versus I think when we stem from trauma, it's because we're doing decisions for other people and we felt like we were violated against what we wanted to do. And so that was something you chose to do. So like, can you kind of like go into how you approach that situation just because there wasn't, I guess, would you call it an emergency, or like quite a bit of a journey postpartum?
Before we go to that part, I would love to talk about what instinctive birth is, because I don't think we covered it in the sense of like maybe birthing a little bit, and then I can go into what happened at the end, and then I'll go into the postpartum, if that's okay. Right. So with my birth, I had an instinctive birth. I'd gone into had a physiological. I had a couple of doulas who were coming, and I said to them, this is what I want. I want to have an instinctive physiological birth. I don't want to be coached. I don't want you to tell me positions to get into. I want to do this on my own. Like you, I believed I could birth my baby vaginally. I was thinking maybe I won't even call them until I've birthed the baby, because my main concern was birthing the placenta, because that to me was a little bit, oh, I don't know what to do there. Also the blood loss, because if there's blood loss in the pool, it's different shades of color. It can look like there's a lot of blood. I had realized through interviewing women on my podcast that some of them are transferred into hospital from a little bit of blood, like in the shower, because the water actually makes it look like a lot more than it was. And so they would unnecessarily transfer, like due to lack of experience and having someone there that was experienced. So I teed it on like, what is a free birth? What is an undisturbed birth? What is a physiological birth? And then I asked, Rachel Reed, like, I asked her when I interviewed her on my podcast about it, about having someone present. And she explained that even some mammals like elephants stand around each other and support each other. And I love elephants, and I've watched a lot of documentaries on elephants, and all the women stick together. They help, like the grandmothers help the mothers raise their babies when they're born. And I just love that culture of women supporting women and helping raise generations and passing on that wisdom, essentially. Like an elephant getting stuck in the mud, and the mum is really not great at pulling the baby out because she's just beginning her motherhood journey. So the grandma elephant comes along, who's a pro. She's probably had like 5 babies or however many, and shows her what to do, and it saves the baby's life. And it's like, cool. We don't actually have that in our society a lot of the time in our Western culture. And traditionally, women have been birthing with women present. We have traditionally had women around us, not in a medical capacity, but wise women who have used herbs or used whatever in our natural environment to support us. Obviously, the introduction of having some of these sterile and antibiotics, like a sterile environment for surgery, makes surgery so much more safe for us. For the very small amount of women who do truly need a surgical birth, it's amazing. Or if anyone who wants to have a birth like that. And then antibiotics to help with infection. And also we have blood transfusions, which is life-saving, and we can manually remove placentas in surgery with antibiotics to make sure there's no infection, because you're putting your hand up someone's uterus. All of these things before were not really possible in a safe, sterile way. Then they seem like very simple things, but they're very simple things. Like when you think about it, I mean, it's just a bit of modern medicine that's really the life-changing thing. So I love modern medicine when it's helpful and life-saving and all of those things. And so I kind of thought, okay, well, I will have a doula, and I'll kind of outsource my power in that part of the birth. So I went through my birth, had a beautiful, peaceful birth. It was amazing, powerful. I just felt really calm. It's just a non-event, really. And then at the last part of my birth, when the baby's head was out, my doula panicked and she told my husband not to touch the baby's head, move away from the baby. I'm an empath, so I feel people's energies and I'm used to reacting really quickly as well. So my adrenaline kicked right in and I'm in my thinking brain. That was enough to shut down my contractions at that point. So baby's head and shoulders are out. And here's me no longer in my birthing mode, no longer undisturbed. And this is the power of, you know, people disturbing your birth. And everyone's different. That could have happened in another woman's birth. And maybe she's not as energetically aligned like I am, or isn't a quick reactor. I've got survival instincts from my childhood. I am aware of danger and I'm looking around. I'm very observant, and that is something that I know about myself. So with the contractions stopped, I'm not in a hospital. I don't have, you know, anything to boost up the contractions or anything. But then it's like you can feel an urgency of, come on, we've got to get this baby out. And I'm looking at them like, well, can you pull the baby out? Somebody, can you help get this baby out? There's no contractions. And I can feel them like, come on. I mean, it was only a matter of a couple of minutes, but eventually I purple pushed the baby out because everyone was just standing around. No one was willing to do anything. And that's fine. That was always the deal, that they were not medical hands-on. And my husband didn't want to like hurt the baby, bless his little heart. He's a very gentle man. And eventually I pushed the baby out. It was only a couple of minutes, but it was quite like very urgent for me at that time. My adrenaline was up. And then baby came on me and I got to find out what she was. And I was just like, oh, so happy that she was born. And then my doula came around and straight away was like, oh, I think that the baby has labored breathing. I would recommend calling an ambulance. So because I'd outsourced that part of my birth, I didn't allow myself to check in with my baby and see what I thought. I think if I had taken the power in that situation and looked at my baby, because I know what a normal baby is. I've had 2 babies by now. I know what a normal baby breathing or whatever is. But I said, yep, okay, fine, because I'd given her the power. And so an ambulance came and then she suggested cutting the cord. And as soon as I picked up the baby, my husband picked her up upright. She started screaming and, totally fine. When the ambulance came, he was all clear on her. But that disruption of the birth and that purple pushing, and who knows if it would have happened anyways, but it meant that there was quite a lot of blood happening and clots coming out of me. And then there was like, a focus on, is the placenta out? Stand up, Ashley. I was really woozy. I had been in the birth pool for 13 hours or something, so I wasn't exactly used to being on land at that point. I was a mermaid. And I'd been laboring for 14 hours, so I was pretty tired anyways, and I'd had lost blood. But then it was just ambulance came, another ambulance came, and it got to the point of protocol of like, we think she's lost a couple of liters. Our protocol is we have to get blood to her before we transport her to hospital. So by the time I got to hospital, it was 2 hours or so, and I'd had maybe like 6 ambulance workers, all men and 1 woman in my space. So obviously that's not going to help my hormones or help me feel safe, relaxed, have the oxytocin, help anything happen. I'd also had the shot as well to help try to manually remove. Apparently having that, you have to get the placenta out very quickly after that. Otherwise there can be bleeding. So that was something my doula had, asked the ambulance to do. So I think all of those things really compounded. Obviously, I was in complete disruption at that time. I'd had medications and people asking me all these questions. I don't know what they were giving to me. There was all these things happening, questions being asked. But I eventually got to hospital after 2 hours. And on the ride, I just wanted to go to sleep. And the ambulance lady kept saying, stay awake, stay awake. I think they may have given me some adrenaline to stay awake or something. And apparently they were pushing the blood into my veins as I was coming into hospital, the doctor had said, wide-eyed and super worried as I had arrived. She was very, very worried about me. That's one thing I didn't really realize. I was really worried about going into hospital for judgment, but I didn't understand how scared they are of women planning to home birth and free birth. There's this whole thing of like, you haven't had prenatal care throughout, even though I had been getting prenatal care from a GP. It's just that they haven't seen you, so they feel like you're not being looked after to their standard. And I would argue that I'm being looked after in a much better way, like a more holistic, stress-free, like it's not like prenatal care is actually helping you in any way. It's just doing tests. So I'd had all the major tests and ultrasounds that I wanted to have, which was great for me. It meant that I could keep an eye on everything. And I was working with a homeopath as well. I was doing natural therapies. And at that time, I was able to have a conversation. They had a student midwife come and talk to me, and I was having a conversation with her and telling her everything. And I told the doctor why I'd chosen the free birth because of them. It was exactly the hospital that I'd got kicked out of at 37 weeks. And she was really good. Like, they'd had a changeover of staff at that time. All the crappy staff had come from that hospital to the other hospital, and all the good staff they'd swapped over after this huge maternity consumer complaint that went through. All these people got fired and all this stuff. Like, we had a massive changeover, which was really good. And she really wanted to make sure that I felt safe enough coming to the hospital because I had children. She wanted to make sure that my children were going to be looked after if anything were to happen. I think that that's great that she wanted to do that. She had a junior with her who I could tell was a bit judgmental. But I signed they gave me a consent form to sign because well, what happened was they tried to manually remove it without any medication first. And after 3 attempts, it felt like they were putting a shovel inside me. It felt very painful. And I was screaming, but it wasn't until the third time that I said, I know I don't consent and I want to be put under, that they said, okay, fine, we're not doing any more. So I had to use those legal terms. I do not consent. I no longer want this. And I said, I want to be put under. And the anesthesiologist was amazing. And he was like, that's fine, darling. I can put you under. Let's do that. And the doctor was in agreement. I understood my risk, lose my uterus, blah, 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 whatever it was. I didn't care. Whatever. I trusted that everything would be fine. And I signed the paperwork and I got to go to sleep. And that was really great because the last experience I had, I was awake for the whole thing. So for me, I didn't want to be awake. I'd already met my baby. I'd already held my baby. And I woke up in ICU because my blood pressure had dropped once or twice in theatre, probably because I had no blood, a lot of blood loss. Totally fine, right? And then I was in there for like 12 hours, which is a standard, I think. And then I graduated out of there. And I just kept graduating until I was just on the birthing ward within 24 hours. And I think for me, it was that I had decided that this was on my terms and that I was advocating for what I wanted and I understood my choices. And so I knew that I could opt for. I can't make them put me under general anesthetic. And so if they said no to me for safety reasons, because they felt that it was unsafe for me to be put under, I would have to have been awake. But if I hadn't have asked for that, and if I hadn't have advocated and said, I no longer consent, I want this, or what else can you offer me, then they probably would have continued going until maybe they got it or said, we call time out, you know what I mean? This is what we recommend. So knowing some options, knowing what could happen in that circumstance, or asking them or having someone with you that understands some of your options means that you can advocate and ask for the things that you want. It means that you can be in a position of power. It means you can negotiate, or you can have options available to you. You can't help who's going to be working on the day, just like you can't help whoever's working at the bakery. Like if they're a sad, miserable SOB, that's their problem. Try not to take it on yourself, because For every miserable person, there's usually like 10 amazing people that are rooting for you behind your back. So in the hospital, it was a very weird situation because I felt ashamed in many ways that I was in the hospital. My daughter was in special care because the first thing they said to my husband was, "Oh, let's get her in special care," which I've since learned is quite common for home birth or free birth transfers. And what they want to do is they want to put antibiotics on the baby for just in case. So you can actually advocate to get the baby tested to see if there's any infection markers before you say yes to something like that. But my husband has said yes, so he consented to that, and she was put on CPAP for the labored breathing. And I just felt, because she was in special care, it was my first baby in special care, I felt like I'd failed her because I went and had this vaginal birth, and then my baby was in special care. She had this drip in her arm with the, it was just a horrible sight. And then I thought that I'd put her at risk. And it wasn't until a few days later that I spoke with the pediatrician and I said, "Can you please explain to me why this happened and why that happened and why you did this?" And they said to me, it was all precaution. Like, she didn't have any risk, like she didn't have any markers come up, or she didn't have this, she didn't have that. It was all precautionary. And so while I was able to advocate for myself, what I wasn't prepared for was advocating for my child. And that was because I'd never been through that journey before and I didn't understand what could possibly happen. And so now I try to make sure it's on my podcast and, my group program, so people can understand how they may treat you and what you can do. My husband could have said, "No, I don't want her to go to special care unit." And we could have advocated for that. And that probably would have been fine. There probably wouldn't have been a problem, Many women say no, and many women keep their babies home, or their husband or partner or sister or whatever hold the baby and say, "No, we're not going to do that, but thank you for that. We've already been cleared by the ambulance," we could have said, you know what I mean? But once they go into that system, it's really hard to get them out. So she was in there for a couple of days, and then she's borderline. What's that one where they go orange?
Jaundice.
Yeah, jaundice. So I was jaundice when I was little, and I'm pretty sure my firstborn was jaundice because she was orange when I came home with her. But because she was already in special care, they're like, she's borderline, she hasn't, but she's little. And I was like, "Yeah, sure, let's do the right thing." So that ended up being like a 5-day thing. And so there was a lot of that. Most of the midwives are pretty good, but there was a couple, one that had said, "Oh, you're so lucky that, nothing bad happened." And one other midwife, an older one, but she was not very nice. She was complaining about her pregnant daughter. She was like one of those older, crabby, thinks that everything she does is the right way to go. She actually spoke to my husband and said to him, "Never do that again. Like, don't ever do that again." Like, and my husband was like almost about to say to her, "You have no right to, nothing about us. You have no right." But he was like, "Nah, nothing like that is ever going to get through to someone like that." So those were only 2 people. Everyone else, like, there were some rogue natural midwives that were like, "Come on, let's breastfeed this baby," because they were giving the baby, making me give the baby formula. I had this huge conversation with the pediatrician. So I was advocating for my baby the whole time. And I'm very proud of myself for being able to advocate and do those things. And that has given me so much more confidence to advocate for my children whenever if I have to go in a hospital. I advocated for my mum recently, who went in with a broken leg, and they couldn't find the break, and it was hidden behind she's got a hip replacement, a metal hip. And I said, "Mum, we know, like, you think it's broken?" "Yeah." I said, "Look, if they don't find it, I'm going to escalate this, because I don't believe in their technology. Technology is limited, right? Like, it's only limited." And so they're saying this, but we know intuitively what's happened. We don't need the technology. And eventually they came back and said, "Yeah, we've found it with the second scan. There is a big break in there." And we're like, "Yeah, we knew." I was going to fight you, though. I was going to fight you if you didn't find it. So it's having that confidence to be able to do those things now that we're trusting our intuition. Like, and we encourage the women who know that there's something wrong with their child to put themselves out there and say there's something wrong. You can't prove it, right? It makes you look a bit stark, raving mad. They think, oh, you're a first-time mum, you're being overprotective. They give second, third-time mums a little bit more leeway, like your experience, you know what you're talking about. And so when it comes to birthing, the same thing. If you've never had a vaginal birth, they're looking at you like you don't know anything. And so you really have to be the boss of your life, because everyone's going to want to pull you and push you in all different directions, but you're the only one who can find the right path towards where you want to go in life.
Your story, I mean, I've listened to your story before, but it's like I listen to so many podcasts, I forget like the end, like
Yeah.
little detail, because I don't even think I remembered that she was in like what we call the NICU. Thing I want you or I want to reiterate that you said, because we're running out of time, about how like you don't beat yourself up and you
Mm,
learn to just like, I think I meant to say this earlier when I was like talking about their second and third time moms that come on here, and I get what you mean. Like sometimes people and society in general just gives them more slack or more understanding, but at the same time, we're still undermined 24/7 about like
mm-hmm.
trusting our intuition and thinking we're right. And like I mean, not just doctors, like your mom or your whoever, gaslights you thinking that they know better than you do for your own child or your body. Um, and so I think probably any woman, but a lot of people like us have that background of feeling like, oh, what could have I done differently? And I loved your perspective
Mm,
of there's situational, like you can't do it with your childhood trauma, like you're a kid, right? But like when it comes to like systematic, um, I don't know if oppressions, but like systematic abuse, like you said, obstetric violence and stuff, there's a way to see like, okay, how can I just do things differently? Like not let me see how, or even when it comes to your kids, making medical decisions with your kids or any of these things that happen, I think um part of, like you said, tapping into that and having happier days is reminding yourself that we just have to learn from what we went through and not like go bananas over it, because I love how you even presented what happened. Like you're very level-headed, you're stable, you're calm explaining it versus I feel like it's that I mean, I'm still talking about my last birth, like, like I kind of go, it takes a lot of inner work to get to that place where you're like, I forgive myself if, XYZ um and understanding, like you said, where the other people are coming from and just this is the system and we make these choices and what can we do at the end of the day? We could just help women understand and do better. We only have 2.5 minutes left. So is there anything else that you kind of like want to end with or tell people, how to find you, all the things you're doing, really quick to do a quick outro?
Absolutely. So anyone who wants to come and chat with me or find out more about Homebirth, come and find me on Instagram, Ashley L Winning. I'm sure we'll put some notes in the show notes anyways for people to find me. I've got a podcast called the VBAC Homebirth Stories podcast, which is where I share real women's stories, expert stories, and I share some of my own knowledge and wisdom. And I also have a group program called, well, it's just a group mentoring home birth program. It's a safe space, as Lizzie mentioned, where we can come together and support each other in sisterhood of women who are having the same kind of birth. And also you have access to amazing modules that cover what I think, after working with women one-on-one, need through that process, through that journey. And so it's about tapping into your intuition and listening to your intuition, understanding instinctive and physiological birth, setting up your birth team, understanding birth debriefing, because you want to start off at the best spot before you go into your next birth. You want to unpack it, you want to understand it, you want to come in with a different perspective of understanding and some sort of healing, I suppose, because you're not putting it on your next birth to heal this last journey for you either. And so there's 8 modules in total, but really the support is, the juice of it is the connection of being able to jump on 2 calls a month with me and unpack anything, talk about anything, ask any questions, share, cry, vent. And that's the beauty of it. And I also work with women one-on-one who want to have that more individualized one-on-one support. But I work with women in high touch ways, regardless of whether you join my group or my one-to-one too. So Thank you so much, Lizzie, for having me on and for allowing me to talk about one of my favorite subjects. I really appreciate you.
Oh, yes. I am so happy that you took the time out of your day. You are in the future for me. So that you're here with me now. I know it's about to cut us off. So I will be messaging you as soon as this is over. But thank you so, so much for being my first guest. And yes, I will have all of Ashley's stuff in the show notes. So thank you guys so much. And Ashley, I'll talk. Hey guys, it's Lizzie in the future here. I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did. I absolutely love Ashley and her perspective, her sharing her story, opening up and being vulnerable. So that way we can help you through your journey and discovering yourself and finding your voice and potentially choosing these like different ways of birthing outside the system. So if you resonated with anything Ashley said, if you want to check out her work, all the things, I do have all of her info linked in the show notes as well as all of my social media. Make sure if you enjoyed this podcast that you do go leave it a 5-star review. Let us know how you're liking it. Tag us on your social media. That way we can get this message spread across even further, and this helps the show get seen. So I love you guys. Thank you so much, and I can't wait to see you on the next episode. Bye.